Welcome to Jeremy Pryor's podcast, or what I like to call Jeremy Pryor Unfiltered. I'm his daughter and producer, Kelsey Gall, and we are excited to bring you seasons of content all the way from Tolkien to theology, from business to family. If you like to contemplate deep philosophical ideas across a wide range of topics, you've come to the right place. Make sure you give us a follow so you don't miss out on future episodes. This episode is part of the 7 Homely Houses of J.R.R. Tolkien season, how hobbits fleeing their homes can help you find yours. Enjoy!
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. I am here with my guest, C.R. Wiley. Chris I was just talking to Chris about he and I have had very similar interests. And he has written a book about the household that to me has been really encouraging and helpful. And then right afterwards, he came out with this book, In the House of Tom Bombadil. And so clearly we also share a love for Tolkien. And I think there's a strong connection between these two ideas. And that's one of the things I really am excited to talk to Chris about. But Chris, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, Jeremy, glad to be with you. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, like I like to do on this, I kind of tease out an idea via an essay on my Substack. And so I'm going to read this and just get Chris's reaction, and we'll dive into this with you guys. I am really working through this idea of home. I think we haven't thought about this concept nearly deeply enough. And so I want to begin to explore this from the lens that for me has been extremely helpful, which is J.R.R. Tolkien's trilogy, Lord of the Rings, especially the first book of that trilogy, the first half of the Fellowship of the Ring. And I can see that this has also been an influence on Chris. So I'm really excited to talk about this. So this essay is just called Finding Home in Lord of the Rings, How Journeying with Hobbits Through 7 Homely Houses Can Help Us Find Our Way Home. All of my life, I have felt the longing to find my way back home. Usually the feeling is subtle. I'll sense something just not quite right about my house, my relationships, or my life as a whole. But when I make subtle tweaks to move closer to this vision, I must pause and ask, where did this vision come from? What picture am I comparing my life to that is serving as my guide to know what to move toward? Then there are those times when the desire is overwhelming. I feel utterly displaced, as if nothing exists in the whole reality of my limited experience that could possibly fulfill the desire arising from some deep place within. The philosopher Martin Heidegger called this experience thrownness. Each of us has the experience of suddenly appearing in this reality, wondering where we are, where we came from, and what in the world we are doing here. Is this why babies cry when entering this world? Do they know there's something indescribably wrong about where they are? Is there any way to find our way back? There are 2 great guides I found in my search that have helped me to understand the reason for this experience. The first guide is the Bible. If the biblical story is true, one would fully expect to feel this experience. The story retells a time when our first parents were literally thrown out of a garden paradise. We all live east of Eden. Walking with God in the cool of the day is an ideal place of natural and curated beauty, a place of unbroken relationships, and total intimacy is what we were designed to experience. But something terrible happened, and we must find a way back to the tree of life. But we can't return. Standing in our path is a flashing sword of the cherubim. Countless authors have explored the biblical story and what it looks like to live a life formed by this narrative. Perhaps someday I'll add my ideas alongside theirs, but I'd like to explore another story that maybe no one has used in quite this way. The second guide is Book 1 of the Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. It is my opinion that Tolkien expressed more lucid and helpful ideas about the home than any other writer in the history of the English language. He did this by sending a group of hobbits into exile. In his first published novel, The Hobbit, he describes the journey on the Great East Road from the Shire to Rivendell, or what he calls the last homely house. But if Rivendell is the last homely house, what other homely homes might exist along that same road? We get the answer in the Fellowship of the Ring. There are, in fact, 7. Frodo and his companions in Book 1 of The Lord of the Rings have 7 unique experiences of home. These 7 homely houses give us a complete picture of Tolkien's profound understanding of the nature of what home is, and this book is my excuse to explore these 7 homes with you and to attempt to mine the resources we can find in these narrative descriptions. Perhaps in this search, we might discover how to build homes in exile and understand the kind of home being prepared for us in a future garden city. Tolkien loved to put maps at the beginning of his books to give his readers a chance to see where the journey is headed. So here is your map for our journey. The 7 homely houses are 1, Bag End, 2, Gildor's Haven, 3, the House of Farmer Maggot, 4 is Crick Hollow, 5, the House of Tom Bombadil, 6, the Inn at the Prancing Pony, and 7, Rivendell, the House of Elrond Half-Elven. We will peer together inside each home and ask questions like, why did Tolkien use this particular detail or description? How does this reflect the ideal homes that we've lost? How might we create a home today that might provide this experience? What does this reveal about the ultimate home we were made to experience and that by God's grace we will one day experience? Before we embark on this journey, let me issue one warning. Someone might rightfully ask if we're living in exile and our future return is secured, it isn't the best path to simply learn to be content and not to make hopeless attempts at building a home east of Eden. Learning contentment is crucial. Our family has practiced a festival called Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles, for the past 10 years. This festival has as its theme the lessons we teach our children about rejoicing and being content in the midst of a life in exile. God warned the Israelites that after moving into the promised land and living in houses they did not build and enjoying fields they did not plant, that their hearts might rest so completely in his blessing that they would forget that the ultimate journey is ongoing, that even in the promised land, we still must live by faith. His solution was to command the Israelites to move out of their homes for 1 week a year, build a temporary dwelling, and point back to their house and declare to their children, this is not our ultimate home. We are sojourners on the earth. We must continue to walk by faith. Our favorite verse for cultivating the heart of a sojourner in our children is found in Hebrews. It was by faith Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave his home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. And even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner living in tents. And so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. Our goal in this book is to never deny the reality that we are sojourners living in exile. We cannot build homes that can rival the home we are journeying toward. The goal of this book is to so elevate our understanding of the nature of home that we, on one hand, realize we can never make a truly homely house on this earth, but at the same time, we can build our homes as signposts pointing to our future home. After all, God did give the Israelites homes, and we must give the same to our children and future generations, but in a way where every experience is like an inkling of the home being prepared for us who sojourn on this earth by faith. Like hobbits, we'll only ever catch glimpses as we contend with the evil of our day. But these glimpses put steel in the spine to continue the journey, no matter how dark the road. Tolkien was fortunate to find companions who understood the depth of what he was attempting to articulate. His friend, C.S. Lewis, while unable to express in myth these realities quite as clearly as Tolkien, nevertheless surpassed his friend when writing prose in passages like this one. Quote, in speaking of this desire for our own far-off country, which we find in ourselves even now, I feel a certain shyness. I am almost committing an indecency. I'm trying to rip open an inconsolable secret, each one of you, the secret which hurts so much that you take your revenge on it by calling it names like nostalgia and romanticism and adolescence. The secret also which pierces with such sweetness that when in very intimate conversations, the mention of it becomes imminent. We grow awkward and affect to laugh at ourselves, the secret we cannot hide and cannot tell, though we desire to do both. We cannot tell it because it is a desire for something that has never actually appeared in our experience. We cannot hide it because our experience is constantly suggesting it, and we betray ourselves like lovers at the mention of a name. Our commonest expedient is to call it beauty and behave as if that had settled the matter. Wordsworth's expedient was to identify it with certain moments in his past. But all this is a cheat. If Wordsworth had gone back to those moments in the past, he would not have found the thing itself, but only the reminder of it. What he remembered would turn out to be itself a remembering. The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them. It only came through them. And what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshipers. They are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited. With that said, are you ready to embark? Because it's time for our journey to begin by entering the Shire and walking up a hill through a narrow greenway where, in a hole in the ground, we'll meet a hobbit. All right. So, Chris, I was curious, you have thought about this idea of home and household and have really developed a theology of how to think about this. And then in parallel, I've had this encounter with Tolkien's mythology. So kind of bring together for me, what is anything in that essay stir up? And I'd just like to hear you kind of articulate the connection between these ideas that you've been, processing.
Well, I think you've done a really good job, Jeremy, of making connections yourself there. I think you're right. A couple of things to remind listeners about it concerning Tolkien and Lewis is they both lost parents in childhood. So, Tolkien lost his father and then was largely raised by a priest. And then Lewis lost his mother. So there was a sense of loss that both of those guys had that I think was imprinted on them and created a kind of outlook and an awareness of their homelessness, you could say. I think that's a good way to put it. Now, in that particular passage you quoted from Lewis, I'm reminded of the German words Sehnsucht, which is the word for this inconsolable longing that he's referring to there. And I think he quotes or makes reference to Wordsworth's kind of buddy, frenemy, Coleridge. They had a relationship similar to, I think, the relationship between Tolkien and Lewis. But I think in Coleridge's work, you really get that as well, that sense. In fact, I think I think Lewis in his definition, I can't remember where it is. Maybe it's the preface to, I guess, Pilgrim's Regress, where Lewis defines Sehnsucht. Maybe it's in Surprised by Joy, but he makes reference to that, the title of one of Coleridge's poems, Kubla Khan, which always did it for me. So
what's the name of that poem again?
Kubla Khan.
Oh, Kubla Khan. Okay.
Yeah. So I've always had that kind of thing. I've got I guess a similar childhood experience. And I think some of the best writers have that. They've got this sense of I guess something lost in childhood at that. Another guy who was really good at sort of working with this is Roald Dahl, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, all those stories. And he lost his father in childhood and had a very kind of, I guess, parallel experience to Lewis and Tolkien. So I think that this is part of it, but I think that it sort of makes it more, I guess, palpable for them, or made it more palpable from that. We all have it.
Yeah.
They just had I think, something in their past that made it more pronounced or maybe unmistakable, and a need to address it.
So this kind of loss kind of almost heightened their sense of what this really was, and they were able to almost push past the sort of picture, this worldly picture of house, to see into something that was almost more metaphysical about home itself. Yeah,
I think that's the key. I mean, if a person can reconcile themselves to metaphysics, a lot of folks have kind of mental blocks when that word comes up. Sometimes people assume you're talking about something Eastern, and we don't want to go there, or they think that you're talking about something so mystical that you've got to be some kind of like Thomas Merton to. But there's basically. The idea is very scriptural. The things that are seen are temporal, the things that are unseen are eternal. So that's kind of what we're getting at here with that. And both Lewis and Tolkien were really good at that. Particularly Lewis was good at sort of elaborating on that dynamic. I think it was just present in Tolkien. He didn't spend a lot of time sort of trying to philosophize about it. But in the essays that Lewis wrote, and even in certain places like in Chronicles of Narnia, where degree Kirk, Professor Kirk, just sort of like is exasperated and says, it's all in Plato. It's all in Plato. What do they
Yes,
teach
that's
these
right.
kids? Yeah.
That's good. So in this, in kind of this reality of, we live in this Western world where, and one of the things I find a little bit interesting is how these British authors seem to have almost a connection with home, homeliness, and they seem to share it at some level. And I know Lewis and Tolkien used to go on these walking tours where they would find inns and along there. I mean, it just sounds so like that. And you look at what happens in the Lord of the Rings, these sort of 7 homely houses that he's able to just to describe one after another. What is it about, like, so we're probably talking mostly to an American audience here. So many people having that experience. What do you think happened? What is the American ethos of home versus maybe what some of these British authors were able to capture in terms of their idea of the archetypal, beautiful, home that God really designed our hearts for?
I think that's a great observation, Jeremy. I do think that there's a cultural difference. I think maybe the American West, our sense of sort of unconstrained sort of possibility, the idea that the horizon always recedes, big sky country, John Wayne on his horse, all that kind of stuff.
It's like a rugged individualism that's not the same as like crafting this ancient rooted home.
Yeah. Here I am in Pacific Northwest, where their idea of an old house is 100 years old, and and I'm from New England, where I laugh at that, where the oldest inn in the Western Hemisphere is right there in Providence, the White Horse, and I've been there many times. What's funny about going to the White Horse is that you sit in chairs that were the same chairs that George Washington and Ben Franklin sat in, and they thought the White Horse was an old inn when they lived. Then they went,
really,
yeah, it was because it would have been over 100 years old for them.
Wow.
But compared to the UK, the New England experience is pretty shallow. 400 years. Try 2000.
Yes,
that kind of thing. And so I do think that plays into it, and maybe too that when you think of England, at least my superficial impression from a distance, I've yet to be visit, is that it's a place that everything is in kind of walking distance. The idea here in the Pacific Northwest is like a short trip is 2 hours down the road.
Yes. Yeah, there are no walking tours in the unless you're hiking. You can't go from town to town, because every village in both New England and in Europe really is designed around that like sort of a day's walk. Which just creates a different kind of pace of life and experience of home. Yeah,
here you drive half an hour and you are in the wilderness. You're out in the desert. I think you're onto something there. I think that they're more attuned and acculturated to that. Maybe we are as well. I mean, there are certain things about the American story that has a high regard for home. But there's always just this sense that of like there's something I'm missing. There's something out the window or down the road that I need to see and go and it's that linear mentality, maybe like I got to go find it out there. Yeah, I think that's right. I think we have that sense, and maybe in a weird way that makes us maybe more, I don't know, sympathetic with Abraham. The guy that's been told to leave and go find, and then never finds it, or he's got a longing for a country that just doesn't exist in this world. Yeah, man. So I think that's part of where in a settled culture like New England, and now we're about. What's interesting to me is that now that the West is, you can't go any further west. There is no frontier. That what Lewis and Tolkien experienced in kind of walking around where they were really surrounded by ancient artifacts. They were, and you see this in the Lord of the Rings, that there's they're living in the ruins of an ancient civilization that they're constantly wondering about. And I know that Tolkien was obsessed with the fact that so much of the mythology of the island of England was lost. And so so he wrote the Silmarillion to try to reimagine what a mythology could have been, because he just couldn't stand the fact that it was gone. We really have almost no, it was tiny fragments, I guess, of that. And so I think that was part of that lostness. I'm looking at the ruins of this civilization, and he used, mostly his philology, right, his language to basically do archaeology on that. Maybe what those ideas could have been.
Need a blueprint to revise your family to be a multi-generational team on mission? The book, Family Revision by Jeremy Pryor, is the book that summarizes all the big picture ideas you hear on this podcast. Available on Amazon or familyteams.com.
I think Barfield was probably influential, in some sense with that. Owen Barfield did a lot of work on that subject.
Yeah, man. So I'm curious. So when you're reading like the Fellowship of the Ring, and you're kind of encountering these homes, and you sort of zeroed in on Tom Bomb. I wanted to ask you, like, what was it about the House of Tom Bombadil? Like, why did you pick that? Like, what captured you? And because I think that one of the things that's interesting about the way that you're wired, I'm similar. I kind of like, there's this interesting connection between the idea and sort of the archetype, the aesthetic, and it seems like there's something about the aesthetic that Tolkien, was trying to capture, which, I still, I don't know how you're feeling, what you feel about this, but, we don't, Peter Jackson obviously didn't bother for lots of, reasons, to not try to recreate the House of Tom, but there's probably good and bad. I'm curious what you think of that, but yeah, what was it? Is there something about the aesthetic of the House of Tom Bombadil that captured you as you are thinking about the household, and how far back does that go?
I guess I've always liked Tom. I mean, I know some people don't. I mean, the songs get on their nerves and stuff, and they can't see the point of them and so forth. But I always thought, even in my earliest readings as a teenager, that Tolkien was smarter than me, and if he put him in, there's probably some good reasons I don't understand. And it's remarkable how few people think that could be the case.
Right.
That maybe the author's up to something I don't understand.
Yes.
And then it would cause me to like dig into it. Some people are just too dismissive. They don't have the patience for that, I suppose. But I started to reflect on him. But I always liked it. A couple of things that seemed to me incongruous. One is his absurdity, it's sort of the apparent absurdity of the character and his power. These two things go, right alongside each other. It's pretty evident just based on things that occur in the story that this guy is incredibly powerful, more powerful than Gandalf, probably more powerful than Elrod, maybe even a challenge to Sauron. He's a big deal, and he's completely sort of like unconcerned with anybody knowing it.
Yes. Just sitting in his little forest.
That's right. And I think sometimes people are put out by the idea that he just was too, I guess, indifferent to the fate of the people around him. But he saves the hobbits. But also, this has got to be like round 20 for the guy. So this is not like, I mean, he actually knew the big guy. He knew Melkor,
Yes.
So this is not like new stuff for him. And I also think that there's some indication that he knows how the story ends. So I get into that a little bit. So, he's not, I mean, he cares about, I mean, the hobbits and their ponies, and goes out of the way to make sure they're okay. That's something, there's another interesting, I think, contrast in the story between him and the elves. So like the elves are sort of like, I guess, weary of the world in a certain sense. They see it as something that's a lost cause. They've done everything they can to preserve its beauty. They've, tried to enjoy it for its own sake. And they see that it's just graying all around it. But here we have Tom, who's older than them and gets up every day and has, something to sing about.
Yes.
He just is. It's an indomitable joviality, and I think that's the thing I liked about him. Those things, and then I've got a background in the arts, and I've always liked kind of funky people, and he just was funky guy.
Yeah. So that kind of earthiness, that near to mortal heart kind of experience that they're having in his house. And you called the book In the House of Tom Bombadil. And like, when I think about every time, when they talk about kind of the table and the cream and there's like, it's so earthy the way that Tolkien describes you're walking into the perfect English like countryside house, but it's somewhere in between. Like you're saying, it's not the same as the elves. It's not the same as the hobbits. There's something else that he's trying to capture there. And anything else about the house itself And
Well,
as you thought about that.
there have been people who've speculated as to the kind of creatures Tom and Goldberry are, and I think they're creatures. I don't think that Tom is Luvatar. I think he's a creature. He's the oldest, as he says, and I think the people who've proposed, the notion that there are elementals, that in some sense that she's bound to water, in some sense he's bound to earth, or an expression of each.
Yes.
And I think that makes a lot of sense, just from this earthiness component, nearer to the mortal heart. That I think, if I remember correctly, it was just a narrative side that Tolkien puts into the story as the hobbits are admiring Goldberry. And but I think that's part. But the hominess of it, I mean, the kitchen garden, the domestic animals, or at least the Fatty Lumpkin. I always thought Fatty was a pretty fun.
Yes.
He's kind of like,
I love that guy.
The version of he's Tom as a pony. and the other ponies are as devoted to him as the hobbits are to Tom.
Yes.
And I think that and then the feminine character of Goldberry, this unaffected, just very sort of natural feminine character, and then juxtaposed with Tom, all of that just made me think, I'd be, anytime I was in the neighborhood, I'd hop over there and see if they would invite me in.
Yes. Yeah, what a delightful place. And it's interesting, like I've thought a lot about this question about whether or not there's a finish line at some level to the craft. Like there's sort of this Western idea that we can never build a house big enough. I need a super yacht. I need and so there you've got this super powerful being who is content with his country garden and his donkeys and his relationship with his wife. And, this, there is such a contentment. And it kind of reminds me of, in Micah 4, where in the latter days, it says every man will sit under his own vine and his own fig tree, and no one will make him afraid. Tom is afraid of nothing. There's a sense in which he's got, when I think about that man sitting under his vine and his own fig tree, it's a sense in which you're in your household as a father, you have achieved you don't need to go out and conquer anything else. You don't need to add house to house. You don't need to your heart can rest in this very simple life. And I think that when I am reading the scriptures about the kind of fulfillment of the kingdom, especially with a picture like that, it sounds very earthy to me. And there seems like there's something in the heart of the Western father or man who's building a household that is missing the Tom Bombadil and some of these things. How have you thought of, like, what is it like? We're grasping at something. It's like we think we're trying to shove something. Like, do we need to give men a map for how to find home? This is kind of where I'm really grasping at this.
Well, I think that the biblical image of rest is something that needs to be, I think, further developed in our theology. One of the things that is evident when you read, say, Semitic understandings of rest, particularly when we're talking about royalty, is that where are you resting? You're resting on your throne. So there's a connection between rest and rule.
Okay.
And you get the image of peace on every side after the conflicts. So there is, I think, a quality or character to the masculine temperament, which is a warrior. It's a kind of the need to prove one's mettle, the need to establish one's dominion, all that kind of stuff. And I think all that's good, but then you someday you got to be done. Someday you got to be able to sit back and just say, hey, this is all right. I'm content. Here I am. Got a beautiful wife, got some kids, got things looking good, and not just be sort of distracted all the time with the next thing you need to conquer or whatever. There are a lot of kids who've had fathers who I think were like that Rolling Stone, the songs from the 60s and the 50s, that it was a Rolling Stone. You just never saw that guy.
Yes.
He was
Searching for something.
unsettled. He was always looking for the next thing. Grass was always greener someplace else. So there's got to be a sense of okay, we've arrived. Now it's time to enjoy the work, the fruit.
Well, because I don't think that picture really exists well for the Western, even like we're talking about the Christian man. Like we're having a hard time because I do think that within British culture there was this sense of hearth and home. There was sort of this idea that what else do you really want? I mean, this is the good life. You want to have tea at 4. You want to when Bilbo, that's what's so interesting to me about the bookends of the Lord of the Rings in Hobbiton, at Bag End, tea at 4, smoking my pipe, being with my friends, going to the pub. There is no better life. You can't find a better life. I don't think that we have a picture like that in our culture.
No, we don't. There are a lot of reasons that go into that. But I think, another thing to consider, as we've been talking about this a little bit, I've been thinking about the kind of the sort of examples from antiquity that are fun to consider. Thinking about classical culture, like Diocletian, the emperor. Now, we remember him as a bad guy because of the persecution, but in another way, he was actually a guy who kind of worked his way up from the bottom. He was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth, and he becomes emperor. And he's the only emperor that I think retired. He was like, I'm done. I want to go back to the farm.
Like a Cincinnatus character.
Yeah, very much that way. And and they keep bringing him out because there are all these, crises that they want him to help with, them deal with. And there's this one letter he writes where he says, "You want me to come back? You should see my cabbages. The ones I've grown with my own hands." So this is the emperor who's in the garden with his hands in the dirt, and he doesn't want to leave. There's another great, and I can't remember which Stoic it is, but there's this emperor who has an advisor who's a Stoic, and the Stoic, says, "What do you intend to do now that you're emperor?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to do this. He's going to conquer the Gauls, and I'm going to go into Germania and conquer those." And then the how it goes. The philosopher keeps asking, "Now what? Then what? Then what?" And then he says, "Well, then I'll come home and sit on my throne and enjoy, the fruits of my labors," or whatever. And the emperor says, "Well, you could do that now with all that trouble."
Yes, if you knew your finish line was. Right, and you can aim at it, so that's interesting. I'm curious what your thoughts are, because in Silicon Valley, Stoicism is erupting in popularity, because I think that the men in particular who are basically gaining the world when it comes to wealth are desperately trying to figure out how to put their hearts at rest, and so they have, I think, fallen back on Stoicism more than any other form of thought, because of this. Like they're trying to find peace or rest, like you were describing, and it seems that philosophy is having a massive resurgence amongst especially really successful young men.
Well, if you're gonna have a philosophy from antiquity, that's the one.
Yeah.
And a lot. I think it makes for. I think potentially maybe in a generation or two, maybe a fruitful field for us to harvest.
Yes.
Because Stoicism won't satisfy. But I think if I wasn't a Christian, I'd be a Stoic. Yeah. So I understand, the appeal. And one of the great things is, you think about, Marcus Aurelius. Probably a lot of folks are familiar with him because of Gladiator. He's a really rotten kid, and he really was a rotten kid in real life. I mean, he was rotten. But Marcus Aurelius was really, pretty sterling character, and he learned at not in person but at the feet of the writings of a slave, Epictetus.
Oh, really?
So you've got sort of the span of the social hierarchy here, and Stoicism is the philosophy at both ends. So it's this remarkable. And I actually wrote a young adult novel. I got a series, and the first book is called The Purloined Boy, and it's actually about home. And so it'd be something that people are interested in that theme. But my mentor in the story is named Epictetus after the Stoic philosopher. So I've done a lot of work in Stoicism. like I said, if I wasn't a Christian, I'd be a Stoic.
Yeah. Well, I think the sense, because what we're kind of getting at is, I think that they were a lot of times you think that the only way to aim is sort of up, bigger, better, and you can't ever see where that goes. And Stoicism, I think, is a lot more like, you're aiming at something that's realistic, like you're trying to find contentment, as opposed to conquering everything. And so it's like there has to be some governor on this obsession, and this natural drive, like you described earlier, for rule and dominion that God's given all of us, but men in particular have a drive for that. And I think that if there is a clear idea of what they're aiming at home, and one of the things I'm trying to understand is would you recommend that guys, like I have this, this, as I'm kind of discipling young guys, they're moving kind of from house to house. They're trying to find houses that, are accommodating their family at different stages. And what I like to talk to them about is, while you're doing that, at some point along the way, let's start to actually dream about your multi-generational house, like where you're going to put your roots down. Think about what that is, where that is. Like it could be a small cabin. It could be, it doesn't have to be a mansion. It doesn't have to be at the top of a mountain. Obviously different people have different ambitions. So like really understand that. But have you found it helpful to maybe talk to young men about thinking about the idea of home, so that they, so put some kind of governor on, on this almost endless pursuit of bigger, better,
Right. Well, I have thought about it, and I haven't done the task myself to my own satisfaction. I'm very content in my family relationships with my wife and my kids. My kids are all grown, but I kind of I wish if I could go back, I think I would have gotten on this theme earlier. So I really began to develop my thinking in this area after my kids were already teenagers, and I was engaged with them on a lot of this stuff. I talked about this stuff all the time with them, and I think they've all kind of bought into it. But in terms of having like a place that we said that's our place, that wasn't the case. And I think one of the things that we deal with, and maybe this is coming to an end, and maybe it's a good thing, is going away to college, for example.
Yeah.
So like my oldest son went to Wheaton, and he met a girl he was from Connecticut, and he met a girl from Houston, and now they're married and live in Nashville.
Yes.
It was kind of like a compromise,
between the two.
That's right. Now I'm living in Battleground, Washington, and so there is an unsettledness. Now, I think that I'm supposed to be here. Don't get me wrong, but like, for example, I'm a friend of Doug Wilson and his son Nate, and they live in Moscow.
They put some serious roots down there.
Yeah, and I remember talking to Nate one time about this, and when he was pursuing the woman who would become his wife, he let her know right up front that he was going to live his life.
Family lives in Moscow. Yes,
that's right. So she's from like Southern California. She's like a surfer girl.
Okay, wow, yeah, so that's a stretch.
She left all that behind and now is there with Nate in Moscow. Wow. And so that's true for all the kids, but it was also true for Doug's siblings. They're all in Moscow.
Wow.
And his father was the one who started the sort of the family kind of, I guess you'd call it, empire there.
Yeah, the dynasty of the Wilson dynasty, where and he had a strong vision, obviously, for why he picked. I heard some kind of story where he actually did some research, decided on Moscow because of its proximity to a couple of universities, and then said our family's taking this. And we did something similar with this town we're living in now, where we spent a number of years really praying, thinking, and I think, decided that no, this is where we're going to put our roots down. My parents then moved in with us, and and part of this is to create that to me, the most helpful scripture passage about trying to find this finish line is just the chapter Psalm 128, where it talks about, may your wife be like a fruitful vine in your house. May your sons be like olive shoots around the table. Thus is the man blessed who fears the Lord. May you live to see your children's children. And there's something about like Psalm 128 to me it's kind of like, this is the place where we have a divine revelation of the good life. And so when I read Psalm 128 and then I look at the pictures in the Lord of the Rings, I think the closest that has come to me has been really Rivendell. So you have this, this Elrond, he's this, father figure, but his multi-generational family is also there at these tables, having, these meals, telling stories, the family lore going back thousands of years.
Yeah, he's got to be with his great
How many
grandchild.
generations? Yes. Oh my gosh, could you imagine?
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, I think Tolkien, like I think that when he stretched to his own imagination to its almost a breaking point for crafting what this archetypal perfect house is, I think Rivendell kind of like was his sort of magnum opus of that kind of thinking.
Well, and the name he gives it, the last homely house.
Yes.
And I wonder how it all developed in terms of his thinking too, because when you write fiction, it's not as though you have it all thought out. You kind of discover it as you go.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, as it's the house appears, in The Hobbit, and then it's further developed in, the Fellowship of the Ring. And I wonder how all of that plays into it. In terms of what's closer to home would be Farmer Maggot's house.
Yes.
That's another place I would have enjoyed visiting.
Yes.
And have you read The Adventures of Tom Bombadil?
The Tolkien's, yes.
Yeah. So you're familiar with the fact that
he hangs out with them.
Yeah, he goes and visits them in their house.
Yes. Yeah, it's like their friendship is part of somehow the connection between those two houses.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Tell me more about that. So Farmer Maggot, when I think about his house, so yeah, there's earth under his fingernail. Like, I can't remember how Tom talks about him, but it's like he loves this guy. There's shrewd guessing, but there's also this weird scene, right, of Frodo having been disciplined by Farmer Maggot, how he protected his land and his mushrooms. Yeah, I'm like, what is Tolkien getting at? Like the dogs, there's a lot going on there.
Well, I do think that there's something to be said for something that Jordan Peterson's been known to get at here recently, and that's the dangerous man is you can't be a good man unless you're a dangerous man. I think that's the idea. I kind of got that even as a kid. I had a sense that a father is both feared and loved, and sometimes the attempt to be too friendly or to be too, I guess, approachable actually undermines the relationship that a father has with his family. So in other words, if you because the idea is that, that'd be just awful if my kids were afraid of me.
Yeah.
But actually, it's if it's understood in the right way, if you understand it in the sense that we see, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, that kind of thing. And in some sense, a father is an analog to that. Obviously, there ought to be genuine love and affection for wife and children and so forth. But his authority has to be respected. And there are times where he really has to be, sort of the lion who is establishing, order, or the bull elephant trumpeting to the herd.
That's right.
Kind of thing. And usually those, if the conditions really are frightening, to see that your father is even more frightening is actually a source of comfort.
It is
in a weird way. Dad can handle this.
That's right.
That kind of thing.
Well, it creates inside of the children this internal sort of governor, right? Which, without having a father that you fear, then the sense is I can always overthrow my father. And I think that actually creates a lot of the hyperactivity and the challenges that a lot of kids have in governing their own behavior. They never hit a brick wall in their life. And I hadn't thought about the fact that you could kind of go through these 7 homely houses that I'm working through and talk about the domain of the man, and the rules. Like, Gildor has a set of rules he talks about when they go to his little campsite, whatever that is in the story. Every single one of these fathers, obviously Tom Bombadil, Farmer Meg, it's really clear. I'm going to, dive into with Crick Hollow and the whole, Brandy Buck, kind of their giant multi-generational family house, which is always ruled over by this head.
That's right.
Yeah. Right. Brandy Buck or whatever. Yeah.
Right. That's fun. Yeah. I think that's great. So if I understand correctly, this is to be published as a book soon.
Yeah. I'm hoping to work through it. I'm definitely going to take my time on this one, because I think I'm having a deep aesthetic kind of like exploration that I want to have. So it's part of this is in conversation with you and others that have also explored some of these ideas. And my real hope is to be of help to people to really uncover, because I think, like you said, the way Tolkien wrote was like, he said this, he was sort of discovering things. He wasn't imposing a really strong kind of allegory on his story. He kind of just, like, probably the strongest example was when he, Frodo, or I think his name was Bingo when he first wrote this first version, and Bingo was out there like because he ran out of money and Uncle Bilbo's money, and then he said that all of a sudden he heard a horse coming behind him, and that was the first time Tolkien said he discovered the Black Riders were after later became Frodo, and I think that because Tolkien wrote in this way, sort of from his heart through his head, there was some kind of he has inside of these images there's things you can mine that I don't even know he was consciously aware of, that he was discovering.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that I've got a number of friends who write fiction, and the stuff I've kind of had a chance to see related to people like Tolkien and my own experiences. That's really the way it works for everybody. And there are different ways to sort of like make sense of that. Getting back to metaphysics, I think there's a metaphysical explanation. I think we really do live in a world of analogs. And if we live in a world of analogs, then as we write about things and reflect on them, there'll be connections made that we weren't even aware consciously that we were making, but on sort of second thought or on reflection, we see, oh wow, that's going on there.
That's right. Yeah, man. I think that's what makes art, the difference between art and propaganda, right? Propaganda is essentially, I already know the connections I want you to make. So I'm going to force you to make them through making art.
Right.
And I think there's been a lot of Christian art made in that fashion, and now there's a lot of leftist art made in that fashion. And it's like, guys, stop. Like, what we need is artists who have the courage to really discover what's kind of, and what like Tolkien talked about, the leaf mold, where he got so many of his ideas was, all of his time just marinating in these ancient stories and mythologies. It would sort of all compost together, and then out would grow Tom Bombadil or Elrond or these different characters, which are analogs of are composites of lots of stories that Tolkien was richly rooted in.
Right. I think that's right. Yeah. And in a way, I'm kind of pleased that the woke crowd has made all the mistakes that some Christian writers made for a long time.
I know. You can see what happens when you try to write a movie script, with that kind of propaganda in mind. It doesn't, they smell it.
That's right. And it's awful. You just don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah. We need real art. Mm-hmm. This is really helpful, Chris. I want to talk. And so, as we kind of wrap up here, so you, in terms of, like you said, there's several books that you've written that I've read, The Household and the War for the Cosmos, and now in the House of Tom Bombadil. I would just like to say to everyone listening, guys, these are really helpful maps into understanding what this picture is. I think this is so important that we get into, we increase the resolution of what home is. Like that is a worthwhile thing to do. And these books explore that, as well as obviously what we're talking about with Lord of the Rings. Is there, and you said there was another, was it a fiction book that you wrote that actually explored this theme?
Yeah, it's the first book in my young adult series. It's called The Purloined Boy.
Okay. Purloined Boy. Awesome. I'm going to take a look at that for sure.
Yeah. And then I wrote a book called Man of the House, which is more of a kind of manual on how to kind of just think about households in a kind of very practical way.
Awesome. Yeah, this is one of the parts of this conversation I think for me was really helpful, is to make sure that we tease that element. That's a thread we can like kind of chase through the entire 7 houses that we're going to be exploring. Anything else? Anywhere else that people can find you? You've got a great podcast, the Theology podcast.
Yeah,
I just found this recently.
Yeah, if folks want to connect with that, that's great. It's been a real surprise to us that it's grown like it has. And I guess that's basically it. I mean, if you find yourself in our part of the country in the Pacific Northwest and you're in town, let me know.
Awesome.
It'd be great to meet a listener to your podcast. And I'm always working on stuff for magazines and stuff. I just just had something come out in Touchstone here about Tom Bombadil.
Oh, nice.
And I'm working on something for First Things right now. But I'm always kind of, and I've got a book. I'm working on a commentary on the Book of Acts.
Oh, great! Oh, that'll be good. Talk about another. Yeah, I've households and Acts. That's another whole. Mm-hmm. There's a really. I think Paul lists almost every household that through which these people of peace through which he ministered to that city.
Yeah,
I think that's a really underappreciated element of Acts.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I'll say that you prompted me to think that. Give you a footnote.
Oh man, well, yeah, it's great. Justice, Crispus, Lydia, Cornelius. I mean, you see all the households. I really, I'm fascinated by that, because I think that the biggest difference between how we think about church today and in the first century, likely the reason our biggest blind spots come from the fact that they understood households so deeply.
Yeah, I think that's
right.
First
century Jewish and Roman households were so strong compared to what we've got today with the nuclear family.
Well, I think that's right. And I think it's one of the reasons why we misinterpret or misconstrue the household codes and just all kinds of things get lost on us.
Man, more great things to talk about, Chris. I would love to have those conversations too, especially when the commentary comes out. Well, I'm going to show you guys. This is, by the way, Canon Press did a beautiful who did this sketch of Tom Bombadil?
That was me.
Nice. Okay, so Chris has got his sketch of Tom Bombadil on the cover. If you guys are looking at this on YouTube, I'm showing the book. And one of the things I love about what Canon Press did is that they really made this book like aesthetically pleasing.
Oh yeah, I was very pleased.
Cool.
Yeah, very pleased with how it came out. They've submitted it to, I just learned today, to Christianity Today for their Book of the Year stuff.
Oh,
so I don't know if anything will come of that, but it's in the running.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, yeah, like we were saying, I love it when things are done with this level of excellence, and especially when you're talking about something that's so deeply aesthetic, like being inside the House of Tom Bombadil and exploring all the themes. I love the way this book was published. So thank you, Chris, so much for being on the podcast, and thanks for what you've been seeding into the whole kingdom here. Well, thanks for having me, Jeremy. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for listening to Jeremy Pryor's podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you don't miss out on any future content. Follow Jeremy on Twitter and Instagram, as well as his Substack blog, all linked in the description. See you next time.